Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I am Elijah, as you know, and just a moment for why we're here. This is the final component to my Certified Spirit Educator certification through the Society of Wine Educators. And we're talking about the properties of oak aging. So taking a step back, a couple centuries back, and thinking about why we're using not only barrels, but just vessels in general to store spirits. Because we're thinking about spirits here. We can, think about oak and stainless steel and concrete and things like that. Those vessels as, post distillation, maturation vessels for not only, things that are distilled, things that are brewed, think beer and wine, things that are fermented, but we're sticking here to the idea of the context of spirits. So taking a couple centuries back, thinking around to the 10th century BCE, I want to pose the question to you three. Why do you think that we are starting to see in this area in which, fermentation is really starting, we're starting to see the use of oak and different types of vessels for fermentation? What are a couple different reasons that you think that people in that era were starting to use vessels? Preservation, yep. Protecting what's inside of that vessel from outside harm, insects, bugs, bacteria, viruses, things like that. What's another?
Changes the flavor where it can.
Exactly, for sure. So, especially when you're using a material like wood in which you have that diffusion inside of the wood, you extract a bit of those vanillins and those sangreal flavors. That's where you get your vanilla, your smoke, your flavors like that, your coconut. You're also having it be used for ease of transportation. Liquor at this time still is, to an extent, historically a very big piece in trade. So that's how many civilizations that are starting up are trading with each other. That's a form of currency. So large formatted tanks, whether they be made from clay, earthenware, or something like wood, not necessarily oak when we're thinking about the 10th century BCE, different types of wood, whatever was available at the time. These are the types of materials that are really going to be commonly seen. So they make it a lot easier to be able to transport from part A to part B, city A to city B, so that you not only have commerce, but you have sort of the diffusion of this beverage into other parts of the local region. So we have those three primary reasons for why we're seeing these vessels and the evolution, therefore, thereof, if you will. We are seeing lots of production in Greece, lots of production in Italy, specifically Rome and Pompeii, in addition to Egypt. So we have sort of this Mediterranean crescent that we're seeing a lot of these primitive sorts of maturation containers being used. So thinking about why, we're thinking about where, and we're thinking about why we still use vessels to this day. We talked a lot about why transportation is still certainly a valid reason, but flavor is what we've really harnessed. The idea of toasting and charring, which we'll get onto just a little bit later, but also using wood specifically. Wood is a waterproof material, especially when you put a bunch of staves together that are held together very tightly. The cell structure is extremely well knit, so you have a very, very, very small amount of room for air to pass through, a very, very small amount, so we'll talk about micro-oxidation in just a wee bit, but really no water is able to fully penetrate through, so you end up having a vessel that's really able to contain all the liquid that you're aiming to mature. You also have a bit of durability. Oak is extremely durable in terms of long-term aging. You're able to age a single spirit or a beverage for a period of decades, up until just under a century, if you will. Whereas something like an earthenware vessel, clay, is going to degrade over time. We're not going to talk about stainless steel. We could use stainless steel for just about forever. But we're thinking about being waterproof, being durable. Oak is also fairly flexible in terms of its tight-knit molecular structure, but also in terms of how you can structure staves. That's how we get barrels themselves. That's how we get those unique oblong or oval shapes that you'd see in, say, a French building or something like that. So diving a little bit deeper into the different types of oak that we'll see commonly used today, all are going to be housed within the overall family of Quercus. So we're going to see two different varieties coming from Europe, one different variety coming from the United States. Our U.S. variety, or you'll hear American oak, Quercus alba. lots of production in Pennsylvania, lots of production in Wisconsin, lots of production in Minnesota as well. Quercus alba is known for having a little bit more of an ability to trap a little bit more of water and alcohol into the cellular structure. The structure is a little bit more loose, if you will, so there's a little bit more ability for that alcohol to really saturate into the cell structure of the wood. We're also seeing in Europe two primary types of wood. We're seeing Quercus robert. This is English wood. So this is slightly less aromatic, a little bit coarser, and like I said, sort of like American, a little bit looser in terms of its molecular structure and how close the cells are bound to each other. So it provides a little bit less in terms of aromatic lift. So it's great for spirits that are really aiming to preserve varietal character. So think cognac. We want to be able to not only age cognac in barrel for color, for traditional style, but we want to make sure that it's not overpowering in terms of the smoky, oaky, toasty, vanilla-y sort of situation. We want to make sure that we're highlighting those flavors of Uni Blanc, primarily Chambord, Colombard, things like that. Chambord, that's a rapper that I just said. It's really funny. So that is going to be used for spirits that are designated to be a little less aromatic in terms of their post-distillation maturation. But thinking about winemaking, thinking about more aromatic forms of oak and wood, we're using Quercus petraea. So that's going to be your slightly more tight-knit cellular structure, extremely aromatic. So that's where you're going to see a lot more vanillin, a lot more singrial, and a lot more of that sort of vanilla-y, smoky sort of flavor, just in terms of broad strokes. It all depends on then how you're toasting and how you're charring as well. Toasting, I like to think of as baking. It's that slow, gentle sort of cooking, almost in that you're seasoning the oak. So it's a period that takes between half an hour and about 2 hours, sort of a gentle cook, not to be confused with charring, which is the idea of active fire, quite literally charring one side of the wood. The charcoal side would be using something like a stave to rather drop in the vessel, but thinking about an oak barrel, we're charring just one side, and it's a period of about maybe 15 seconds to 55 seconds, so it's fairly quick, and the level of char will then dictate how much of an excess carbon layer that you have on the interior of the barrel, which will then lead to how much color you're getting, how much flavor you're getting, how much filtration that you're getting, because we'll get into a little bit later how that carbon layer sort of acts like a form of charcoal filtration, helping to just imbue a little less opaque color, really helping it come through in a really sort of shiny, non-glowing way. So thinking about then diving deep into that molecular structure of oak that I've been talking about, oak has a couple different components that sort of make it up. The main component I like to think of as the skeleton is the cellulose. This is the majority of the wood that makes up about 30 to 40%. It's then followed by the hemicellulose. Think of that as the muscle. That is really the in-between bits of all the wood. That's where you're going to see this mass of sugar and other organic compounds that are going to be a little bit more alcohol soluble. So alcohol, the ethanol is going to have a little bit of an easier time flowing in and out, really diffusing into the hemicellulose. What's left over then is the lignin. Makes up about 25 to 30% of the oak. That's where you're going to see your vanillins and your singrials. Vanilla, singrials, smoke. You're also going to see a little bit, maybe about 5% of the remaining oak be what's called extruded. So these are your gums, your resins, your notes of tannin, both in that term of astringency and that mouthfeel. That's where the tannin, in terms of wood, is going to come from. You're also going to have some waxes, some fatty acids, some lactones, which are where you're going to get those sort of coconutty notes, where you're really classically attributing that to American oak. So your extrudeds are where all those other sort of flavors and organic compounds are going. So we're talking about oak aging. We talked a lot about the history of oak and how we are getting to the comprised oak barrel. But thinking about aging a spirit in oak, why would you want to age a spirit in oak? Thinking about the 21st century, modern spirit techniques. Why are we aging in oak?
The flavor it imparts.
Flavor, for sure. So still a sort of historical reason. We're we're seeing flavor be used now in addition to the beginnings of post-distillation maturation, so flavor is a big one. I also think of historical style. We mentioned cognac. We're thinking about, whiskey, bourbon. These are historical styles of spirit that require post-distillation maturation in barrel to preserve that style. If you think about a bourbon without barrel aged to it, it's not bourbon. That's just white corn. That's just white corn liquor at that point. These historical styles include and must include, some time in oak, whether it be American, whether it be French, whether it be lightly toasted, whether it be just a gentle roast. You have the necessary sort of style be dependent on aging in oak for at least a period of time. So oak aging has a couple different processes that it goes through. The first being the idea of extraction. I like to think of this as diffusion. So take this example of a half image of an oak barrel where this is our spirit and this is just some open air. Looking closer into these individual staves, there are, like I mentioned, a sort of variety of tightness in which you'll have the cellular structure of the oak makeup. And no matter how tight or how loose it is, you're still going to have just a wee bit of area for the liquid, both the water and the ethanol, to flow in and out of the stave. So you're going to have this constant diffusion moving in and out of the liquid into the stave. And while you're in the stave, in that sort of charred, toasted layer getting a bit deeper into the actual stave, you're going to have quite a bit of color extraction, quite a bit of flavor extraction. Those bonds of vanillin, cingriol, and lactones are going to bind to that liquid, and then when they flow out, they're going to perfume and color the rest of the liquid. And it's all a little by slow sort of process, which is why you'll see very small barrels impart quite a bit of flavor in quite a short amount of time, because the surface area is really quite tight knit. Whereas a food tray that is over 1,000 gallons is going to have that process happen over a very slow amount of time. And this process is going to be diminished the longer the oak barrel is used and the lighter the level of toast. So you're going to have a more delicate flavor with a lighter level of toast and char, and a more heavier, robust flavor. The heavier your toast, the heavier your char. So thinking about that idea of diffusion, and with that comes also a bit of oxidation. Water and ethanol able to flow into these staves, but coming from the outside, there's a bit of oxygen that is able to penetrate through. So you're having just a wee bit of micro-oxidation perfuming the entirety of the liquid in the barrel. You're also having this area at the top be a big cause for that oxidation. So this cap is always going to be present. Whether it's filling up to about 95% or filling up to around 85% where this diagram is at, there's always going to be just a wee bit of room at the top. And that's going to continue to expand because of evaporation. You're going to hear the term angel share be used a lot, especially when it comes to whiskey production, but it's included in all distilled products in terms of maturation. There's always going to be an angel share that gets evaporated, that ends up diffusing back through the wood, and what you end up being left with is a slightly more concentrated product. So a bit more color, a bit more flavor, because your total mass, your total volume is decreased at that point because of that angel share. So we have extraction, we have evaporation, we have oxidation coming from both the inside and the outside, that concentration. And I touched just a wee bit on the idea of filtration. So charring creates quite a robust layer of carbon on wherever the surface that you're charring is. In terms of this example, it's the interior of this barrel, the left side of this stave, right over here. And the idea of charring takes direct fire and puts it right on the piece of oak itself, and creating a thick layer of carbon, which acts as a sort of primitive form of charcoal filtration. So filtering not only color, but filtering out any unwanted flavor compounds. So it really is able to tack on to things that you wouldn't want in your end final spirit. Like I always have a hard time with this word. I keep wanting to say ass. Acetaldehydes and other unwanted compounds like that. I'm going to leave that in too. Thinking about that benefit of charcoal filtration, taking all of those 6 ideas and culminating them all into, why we are using oak to age spirits. And I brought these along as well. It's sort of a really subtle example of just seeing the difference between different levels of toast. This is a stave that features a medium level of toast. I'm starting with you, Jose, and then for you, Jeremiah, you'll have a heavy level of toast. And I'd love for you to pass those around and just sort of smell the subtle differences. I find the difference very subtle because, as I mentioned, toasting is more of that baking process. It's gentler, it's softer. It would also be, an interesting experiment to smell and see different char levels, but this I think is a fairly good example of, the slight differences that you'd see in terms of the different levels of toast. So, thinking about all those ideas, thinking about, why we use oak still to this day, I'd love to open the floor up to any questions that you gentlemen may have as we begin to wrap up this presentation about oak.
Can
Let's
you use
wrap
a
it.
barrel forever? Will it continue to impart flavor?
Will it continue to impart flavor is a good question. There's an extreme drop-off in the returns that you're going to be able to get from the barrel. I think, after a period of a couple hundred years, I think you're going to have the degradation be too much in terms of if you're still able to use the barrel efficiently. But in terms of the flavor that you're going to get from that aged spirit, it's definitely going to dropping off to a point where I would say it's going to be almost imperceptible. You're still going to have those other effects, that micro-oxidation and that evaporation still occur, but in terms of the flavors that you're getting, in terms of, thinking aging past a century perhaps, there's certainly a drastic fall-off. Any other questions I can answer for you, gentlemen?
Is there a reason why oak became the predominant wood type in a lot of these areas, as opposed to fir or cedar or something?
Yeah, definitely. It's an idea of, or rather the idea of availability. The American oak being from, the northern hemisphere, this is, the oak that's available for distillers in, the newly formed country of America. That's where we're going to see a lot of historical bourbon houses begin to use their oak instead of importing from Europe. Same thing for European oak varieties. You're going to see those English oaks and those French oaks really be the highlight of those regions. Not to say, though, that other types of wood aren't used. You'll see a lot of acacia and cherry and fir, like you mentioned, be used in more traditional styles of spirit and wine production. But in terms of oak itself, it also has the ideal structure and flavor compounds that you would want to impart on a distilled spirit, thinking about the vanillins, thinking about the singreal, and thinking about those toasty coconutty flavors as well. Not as many wood varieties are going to offer those compounds as well. So oak sort of hits that sweet spot in terms of durability, flexibility, availability, and flavor as well. Amazing. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the time that you've taken. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you learned a thing or two. Cheers.